Good evening, everyone. I know it's cold and grey in Cape Town, but I promise you, you have made the right decision. There is no better place to be in Cape Town right now if you are a lover of opera, if you're a lover of the city and the story of the city, because today we are launching two very important books that will become very important reference point when we tell the story of opera, not only in the city, I would argue, this country, as well as this continent. My name is Melane. It's such a joy and pleasure to be here with you today. And before we introduce you to the authors and the books, please welcome on stage. Oh wait, before I do that, you all are theatre people, so take out your phones right now. Make sure they're on silent. I don't want to force you to come and join the singers on stage to sing along when your phone goes off. Christina, are people allowed to take videos and photographs? Obviously without a flashlight.
Jeremy?
Jeremy? Okay, so you can take videos and you can take photographs, just don't have your flash on, please. And of course, share it as widely as you can with people after the concert. Don't do it while you're here because it's distracting for those of us who want to be able to listen to the wonderful, wonderful stories and some of the treats of music that you're going to be hearing today. Well, this is Opera for Books, and here to tell us a little bit about why this is important and why we are located here today, please welcome on stage the Director of Opera Institute, Sandile Zitha.
Yes, just a word of welcome really to all opera lovers, opera performers, opera academics in the auditorium tonight, and a special welcome to Professor Wayne Muller, who's Director of the Africa Open Institute for Music Research and Innovation at Stellenbosch University. In addition, and in her absence, we would like to acknowledge May Abrahamser, who turned 94 earlier this month. She's unfortunately not able to be with us tonight due to her health, but we are delighted to welcome her daughters, Wendy and Trudy, who are here as guests of honours with their families. If you don't already know a lot about May Abrahamser, you will by the end of the evening. And I would also like to acknowledge Gordon Jeffter's brother, Jeffrey, and his wife, Maggie Jefters, in their absence. They're also unable to attend tonight for health reasons, but we wanted to acknowledge their presence in Cape Town and obviously their closeness to one of the subjects of the books tonight. So this is actually our second book launch evening that we've held this year. It's extraordinary. We never do book launches, and all of a sudden 3 books come along at once about South African opera. We're very, very happy to be able to do that, and I guess we are the ideally placed to be able to do that because we're not only a performing institution, but of course we are a training one at a university, so it makes sense that we look after the academic side of opera as well. In fact, I would say we occupy a unique place really in the training and performance ecology of opera in Cape Town, as we are a harbour for many talented young South African singers to learn and develop all the skills that are needed. Obviously, the skills are not just to do with building a voice, but building musicianship, building a huge sensitivity to many operatic languages that can be expressed really authentically, acting, all those things. I always think that opera singers are the ultimate multitaskers. If we had to do so much at once, I don't know whether many of us would cope. I don't think I would. And I guess we're also just a source of many professional level productions with some incredible young singers on our stages who go off to some really wonderful placements abroad. And many of them then come back and share their talents later. It's not that they go forever, but I guess our most recent high-level people to leave here would be Sipho Fubesi, who went on to the Metropolitan Opera New York, Nontobeko Bhengu in Sakiwe Nkosana, who went straight to Frankfurt Opera. We've had Sandile Zitha, our only recent countertenor, who has just, or is still, I think, in the middle of a production at DELL'AMORE in Brussels. Sipho Fubesi, who's our most recent person to leave and is now a resident at the Royal Opera House in London. So we can be very proud of South African talent, I think, and we're very happy with that. Just as a small amount of background to opera at UCT, I had to do my research. I didn't know immediately, but there has been opera, or there was opera on at UCT from 1929, and I think practically every year from 1933 for many, many years. It was a real focal point for opera in the city. Productions ranged through much of the well-known Italian repertoire, the well-known German repertoire, and even some of the American pieces, the Menotti operas and so forth. At the same time, they were often commissioning, so there were many operas. I guess one of the heads of the music college here was Eric Chisholm, who was not actually South African, he was from Scotland, but he wrote many operas and they were premiered here, and there were other South African composers as well. Historically, of course, eventually the arts councils were formed, and KPAB here in Cape Town, and opera started to be produced there as well, and I think eventually became the focal point for opera for many years, while training never stopped here, and I'm sure performance never stopped here. I have not yet chronicled all of that. Come this century, the birth of Cape Town Opera, and for many, many years, a very special bond whereby most of the productions that were done within UCT were collaborations with Cape Town Opera, and one might say half the pieces that they did were collaborations with UCT, and it was a very, very fruitful way of sharing resources and putting on top-level work. We still collaborate, but not on such a formal and rigorous basis. So we're both producing opera on our own, which means that we are, I suppose, in some ways nearly doubling the offer to the Cape Town public, which I think can only be a good thing. And I guess also just contributing to the creative economy so that musicians and technicians and production people also have work. So all that I think is incredibly fruitful at the moment. On that subject, there's a wonderful appendix in Wayne's book, which we'll be talking about this evening, about all the operas that have been on in Cape Town in recent years. And I guess we want to proudly stand up and say that many of those since 2000 that are down as Cape Town Opera productions were very proudly collaborations with us, and we love to remember that. We've had quite a full season of opera in concert already this year. We have 2 operas coming up towards the end of the year. One world premiere staging of a Donizetti opera, which, if that sounds a little strange, is a wonderful history to it, which I won't go into now. But we're very happy to be doing the first of many stagings around the world. And one at the end of the year, the title of which I will announce very soon, but we have been gifted a conductor and director from Covent Garden to come and lead us through that. So we're very happy with that situation. I don't think I need to go on any more about our positionality in opera in Cape Town. What will be fascinating now is to hear about the history from our authors and from Africa. So thank you, Africa, over to you.
But before we hear from these 3 amazing authors of these 2 very important books, let's hear some music. The Traviata is one of those favorites on Cape Town stages. It was made favorite by the Eon Group and then KPAB and ultimately Cape Town Opera. The most recent staging, in fact, was last year, in the second half of last year. And Jeremy is going to join us on the piano in a moment while we invite 2 of the students at Opera UCT, Nontobeko Bhengu and Mkhanyiseli Dyantyi, to come and give us FELICE from the traviata.
Felice,
ever wonder why it is that we invest in the future of opera, all you have to do is just listen to singers like that and know this is the right thing to be doing in South Africa. Very, very Alright, let's get into the books now. Let me invite up on stage first a researcher at the Africa Open Institute at Stellenbosch University. Her work focusing on the history of opera in Southern Africa with reference to how politics and race intersect in the genre. She has documented the establishment of opera as a genre in South Africa since her first known production in 1802 and published widely about the Féroll-Jon group. She's also the founder member of the international research group, the Black Opera Research Network. Please welcome Dr. Hilde Roos. Joining her on stage is the principal clarinetist, English is my fourth language, of the Cape Town Philharmonic Orchestra, a part-time clarinet lecturer at the alma mater, Stellenbosch University, and was part of the research team for the Bern Academy of the Arts, SNSF-funded research project, Cultural Relations between Switzerland and South Africa, 1948 to 1994, from which the book publication on Board and Justice actually stemmed. Please welcome Féroll-Jon Davids. He's truly brilliant on the clarinet, by the way, truly is. And then our final guest is the author of Opera in Cape Town, The Critic's Voice. He's a former journalist and still an opera critic, writing for the Burger, and currently works in communication and marketing at Stellenbosch University. He's also a research affiliate at the Africa Open Institute for Music Research and Innovation. His research interest is around the performance of opera in post-apartheid South Africa, and his book is a result of his PhD research on that topic. Please welcome Dr. Wayne Muller. Let's get a sense and an overview of what the respective books are. And when we start with you?
Okay, so the story of this book goes back, I think, a bit more than a decade. So, I was a journalist then writing about opera and classical music, and I wondered about these reviews that we publish and what is the story that comes out of it. Is there a story that comes out, and why do we do it? And I thought that would be an interesting topic to write a book about, no, for somebody else, but maybe for me it is an interesting topic to write a book about. And I then realized that it's going to take a lot of research to do a book like that, and trying to find out what are the stories that journalists specifically and art critics and opera critics and classical music critics, what they say about opera in the city and in the country. So what is the conversation that happens in the public debate? And I realized it's going to take a lot of research, and I decided, well, I might as well do a PhD to get this research out of the way. So I did a lot of research and got the first thing I tried to do was get a list, and as Jeremy said, there's a lot that happened at the opera school, there's a lot that happened at Cape. So there's a lot of opera activity, finding out what happened and what were the productions. So the list that Jeremy referred to in the back of the book was how do I need to find a list of these operas, and we don't have proper archives, proper is not probably not the right word, but the archives of all these information. So there's a lot of, I think that was the most difficult process to get to the book, was finding what was performed, when it was performed, and by whom. So that I can start that conversation from there. So the research went into looking at what did people write, the critics write about opera. So I went to the list, got the reviews, analyzed that, and eventually there's a conversation that came out about how the most interesting part for me was post-1994. What conversations came out about how opera changed and how it's changing and how it's transforming. So eventually that's what became the book. So it's about basically a public debate about opera. That was the debate happened in newspapers and articles. So that's what the book is about, and it tracks all these changes that happened over a period of about 30 years. 30 years this year.
Wayne, I'm really surprised by how much opera was actually staged, because I think in the appendix you start listing from 1994 to the end of your research period. And I mean, it goes on for pages and pages.
Yeah. And even before that, so that there's an actual PhD research started in 1985, and I even went back before that because I wanted a bit of context, and it is a lot of opera happened in the city. There's a lot of opera, and I use different materials, so I use newspaper articles, adverts, arts brochures that they printed since the 70s, I used those. There's a lot of different material that I had to use to compile that list. And still at the, I think somewhere in the middle of it, I looked through a newspaper and I saw another production that I didn't know about, so I did add that to the list. It's a list that will, no way seems to be incomplete, because there's always something that you realize that, because we don't have the archive to corroborate the information. So, yeah.
Fascinating. Hilde, how did your book, Sorry, I Am What I Am, The Life and Letters of South African Pianist and Opera Coach Gordon Jeffers, come about?
Well, let me just first tell you, it's really a book about the life and career of Gordon Jeffers. He was a person of colour, born and bred in Elsies River, and he was an alumnus of UCT. He studied here between 1961 and 1963. He did a certificate diploma here at the university. He was a student of Chisholm and Fiasconaro here. But due to the political situation here in South Africa, he was not able to have a career here. He was really an opera coach and a vocal coach and repetiteur. He worked at the Johan Group first, and then he decided to try and make a career abroad. So he went abroad in the middle 60s and then really was able to carve out a career for himself there. So his story in this book is told via the letters that he wrote to his confidant back home, which was May Abrahamson. And then the book is really the letters, and then we have some biographical information interspersed between the letters. So it's really important to remember that the letters, we have his letters to her. We don't have her letters to him, because she kept everything that he sent to her. But because he was very he was very nomadic, so he didn't keep everything. But she was obviously always staying in one place, and it meant enormously much to her, everything she sent him. So she kept everything. So it was really over a 28-year period from 1963 to 1990. So it's a really long period of time that they kept corresponding. In this time, he was a vocal coach, but sometimes he was also an assistant conductor. Those positions in the opera industry, as those of you will know who are in the opera industry, they are really important roles, but they're really always behind the scenes roles. They're never mentioned in reviews, they're never mentioned in program booklets. But it's interesting in the letters that Gordon never complained about this. He never sort of moaned that he didn't get recognition about that. But it's just, the book is really about giving him that attention now. And also being a person of color in South Africa was not able to get the position that he required, that he could have had if there was no apartheid. And then, in conjunction with the fact that he also was a repetiteur, who was of course a position that was on the sidelines and behind the scenes. This book is really, for us, a way of acknowledging him and the work he does and the absolute excellence of what he did, and because he really forged a way and carved out a life and a really, position of excellence for himself, working with the world's greatest stars in the 70s and 80s abroad.
And we'll be touching on some of those stars that you worked with a little bit later. Féroll-Jon, I do want to bring you into this conversation because it was your work on cultural relations between Switzerland and South Africa, 1948 to 1994, that the book publication stemmed from. How?
Yes. So, of course, I wrote my master's thesis on Gordon's life, writing his biography, because when I started with my studies and Hilde showed me the letters that she transcribed, I read it, and of course, first of all, there wasn't much information on Gordon, just generally. And I finished my thesis, just in a nutshell, and then we sent my thesis to Chris Walton, the other editor. And he was like, wow, the letters are amazing. It's just so rich with content. Because in it he talks about the people he met, the singers, and who he worked with, and also the travels that he did, and performances that he has seen. And that's how the project kind of started, with that particular funded research project that Chris was the head of, because Gordon obviously lived during the apartheid era, right? And Gordon also worked in the 70s, which was his height of his career in Switzerland. Yeah. And that's the connection, that he worked there and made a name for himself, and he was South African during apartheid in Switzerland, for example.
And I mean, it goes without I suppose one having to say that it was a loss to South Africa in many ways, because this talent could have been so enjoyed here, and certainly opera in Cape Town and South Africa would have been so beneficial, I suppose, from work of his caliber. Hilde, back to you. What was then the impact in opera, especially in a space where people of color had been excluded from opera, given the work that Gordon was doing?
Well, Gordon worked with the Eon Group. He was obviously the Eon Group. This brings me back into the Eon Group. They were a group of singers of color who were situated in District 6. And it was interesting, I was piqued by what Jerry Muller was saying about the existence of opera, UCT opera at that stage, as it was called, in the 1930s, how they started doing opera in the late 30s going on. And the Eon Group ran their opera production in parallel to UCT opera and some other amateur groups. What is interesting is that, of course, Eon Group, because of racial legislation, they weren't able to perform together. That was how it was at the time. The Eon Group worked under direction of a white conductor, Manka, but they worked in District 6 and they later moved out to Athlone, and Gordon was their repetiteur for a long time. But he moved out to Europe, and every time he came back, he worked with them again. But the interesting thing really for me, which I didn't realize at the time, when I was working on the archive as such, only later on when I sort of was able to compare the output of the UCT operas, the UCT opera school, and Jan, and this was before the National Art Councils came into being, is that they did a very different kind of repertoire. Jan was very, very popular with public, with white public. They had, actually there weren't that many, because of the legislation, white people, they performed in the City Hall, and they had to have permits for coloured people to attend, and they were just like, so if 90% white people could attend, and they had like 10% coloured people who could attend. So it was normally, it was predominantly a white audience who attended the young group's performances. So that, and the UCT opera performances were usually done in the Little Theatre, and their repertoire was quite different. It was German opera, it was a modern opera, Chisholm and Fiasconaro. They had a more refined kind of taste, I would say, and a different kind of repertoire. Well, Jan Group did all the Italian opera, all the Verdis. I mean, Chisholm did Italian opera as well, but not as many. So Jan did, I think over a period of 20 years, they did like 11 opera seasons, and it was, every time the seasons were extended, they were extremely popular. So they really did the staple opera for a good 20 years. And they also did a lot of operetta from 1949. They started with operetta, and they did, I think, a good 10 operettas they did in the course of that 20 years. And the group learned 11 operas that they had learned by heart, the group. So they did really a lot of production. And most of the time it was done for white audiences. And it was a different kind of repertoire as opposed to what UCT Opera was doing. And it was separate though, but that was of course of the legislation.
Well, let's celebrate once again the work of the Ian Group, of course. Verdi's Rigoletto was one of those pieces that they are most celebrated for. And we're going to listen to a quartet now from Rigoletto. It's not the students who will be turning to, but rather the teachers from Opera UCT's here at School of Music. One, Paulina Malefane, Violina Anguelov-Hobbs, Sipho Fubesi, and Tikolo. They've got professors and doctors in front of their names, and you'll know them as they go. Jeremy, of course, will be back on the piano to sing the very popular Bella Figlia DELL'AMORE.
Sol
singing, and I can tell you this corner was going, as you were singing throughout. So your students are appreciative, as the audience of Cape Town certainly is. Féroll-Jon, I'm going to come back to you. You mentioned earlier that it was your thesis for your master's work that led to the discovery really of this life of Gordon. Tell us a bit more about his life and career.
Yes, I mean, like I said earlier, when I started this research, there really was no information whatsoever on Gordon or much. It's really thanks to the Owen Group archive and the letters that may be donated to the archive as well, that I could start to construct some basic narrative of his life, his journey, that I can now, relay today. And upon reading the letters for the first time, I was really astonished to see the caliber of musicians Gordon had worked with. I mean, when I saw it, I was like, how do we not know of this guy? And he's a South African, And I'm talking about his work with the famous Luciano Pavarotti, Joan Sutherland, Renato Tebaldi, Franco Corelli, Montserrat Caballé, and so it goes on, And where is he from? From the humble northern suburbs of Cape Town, Altis River, like Hilde said. And there he grew up. He lived with his aunt Eva, with his single mother parent, and his two siblings, his brother Jeffrey and Susie. But it was his aunt Eva that was the very, very important component that helped him to start with music. Because when he was about 7 years old, he was fascinated by the organist's fingers going across the keyboard of the harmonium. And so he said he wanted to start piano lessons. And his mom said no. Why? Because she believed that there was no future for a colored man in music in apartheid South Africa. But now here's where Auntie Eva came in and paid for piano lessons secretly to the man down the street, gave him the lessons. And that's how he started on piano. And and then after that, he of course took lessons at school. Oh, well, his mom then eventually heard him play, and then she was, wow, I can't believe you can do that. And then her employer, she was a domestic worker, helped them to secure a piano that he could start practicing, so that's how his piano studies started. And then by the age of 13, he started attending rehearsals of the Owen Group, doing the La Traviata production, and then went to the performance as well. And then about 2 years later, when he was 15, he was accompanying a singer at a private concert.
At the age of 15?
15, while at school, high school. And Joseph Manka then saw him there and went up to him and basically invited him to come to Owen and become a rehearsal accompanist. And of course, later that morphed into some vocal coaching at Owen. Because, he grew up in a household that didn't listen to Western art music or opera, for that matter, right? And then he matriculated at the Harold Cressy School here in Cape Town, and then came to study here at UCT, at the College of Music, from 1960 to 63, and like Hilde said, he did a teacher licentiate diploma, and graduated in 63, and then he wanted to change that to a bachelor degree, so a BMAS. And they accepted him, but then, of course, he had the realization, then made the decision to leave South Africa because, I guess, he discovered that his mom, there was maybe some truth in what his mom had said when he was younger. And of course, we know the opportunities weren't the same for people of color during that time. But he left to London in 65 and started working as a music copyist at Boozy and Hawkes. And then the following year, he went to Italy where he wanted to master the language of Italian. So he did 3 months, he was at the Perugia University in Italy, learning about everything Italian literature. And then he came back in 66 to London, where he then attended the repetiteur class at the London Opera Centre. And one of his peers at the time was actually the famous singer, Kiri Tikolo. Yeah, so they were at the same time studying there. And after his studies, his first job was as an accompanist for a production that was touring through England and Wales. And they did many opera performances there. But then he moved back to Milan for 3 years. And he had the Owen Group connection, who was Joseph Gabriel's and his wife, is it Mabel Gabriel's as well. So he stayed there for a while. And in the meantime, he was just trying to find work because he taught some English to make some money. He accompanied singing lessons for singing teachers who taught singing. But he struggled financially. He couldn't find a proper job. And one of the things in the letter that he wrote to May was that he was so desperate for just something that he would exchange singing lessons or vocal coaching for a plate of spaghetti.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit funny, but also, of course, sad. But of course, it wasn't, that way the whole time. He did, on a special invite, go to the US in 1970 to be the accompanist for specifically Italian opera, because that is what he specialized in. But then he returned to Milan and he then also auditioned in various places in the US to find a job. And he then got one at the New York City Opera, but then because of visa issues, he couldn't go. And that's why he had to return to Italy. And so he did, and then eventually by 72, he found his first European contract with a company called the Mantua Opera as repetiteur and assistant conductor. But still, many obstacles as a foreigner in someone else's country. Because he got the job, but then the company realized that they had already engaged too many foreigners. And so they wanted him, but they couldn't have him officially. So what did they do? He became the supposed PA of the conductor, but still doing his work as a repetiteur and assistant conductor, and being paid less because he wasn't officially in that title. And sadly, actually, the authorities found out and gave him a 10-day notice to leave the country. But during that first period working at Mantua, that's where he worked with Placido Domingo, Elena Sulietis, and those type of people. Though the conditions were harsh on him. And but then in the same year, in June, he got appointed in Zurich, at the Zurich Opera, as repetiteur and assistant conductor, a position he would basically hold for about, 5-6 years. And at the same time, he got a position in Lisbon. And like I said earlier, the cultural relations, it was at Zurich Opera where he could really establish himself, because there was this very famous Italian conductor, Nello Santi, who was basically, you could say, the father of Italian opera. He worked under him. He was his assistant conductor. And then, of course, in 73, so he got that position and he held it for 5-6 years. But in the meantime, he also did freelancing. And in the freelancing, it's where he met or was contracted by Renata Tebaldi, soprano, to accompany her and Franco Corelli at the Royal Albert Hall in London, and in Vienna at the Musikverein, Saal. And during the period of working for both Zurich and Lisbon, he worked with musicians such as Maria Chiara, Fiorenza Cosotto, Alfredo Crouse, Giuseppe Giacomini, and then Joan Sutherland as well. So just everywhere he's going, and while working at the prolific places like Zurich and the Lisbon Opera, meeting and interacting with these people. Okay, and then I'm skipping now to his supreme height, where eventually by 77 he realizes that he's fed up of seeing white people, apparently, in Europe. And he wants to make a change to the US, because he believes that there will be a bit more multi-racial and multicultural interactions, which of course, I guess, on a day-to-day basis there was, right? But as far as opera was concerned, it was still, the majority was, white people at the institutions. Nevertheless, he went back to the New York City Opera and said, well, you know, a few years ago you guys wanted me, I'm here now, is there a chance? Gets appointed, works there for 2 days. Why? On the second day gets a phone call from Chicago Lyric that they wanted him. He says, okay, cool, goodbye, I'm going to Chicago. And so he packed his bags, he went. And I mean, the decision to go to Chicago makes sense. Why? Because Chicago Lyric Opera is a more international opera company in the sense of they bring in international artists. Where New York City Opera is a local opera company. So, you know, he obviously knew that, you know, it's nice to work with locals, but, you know, I want to work with the international people. And that's where he met Pavarotti, and, you know, worked with Pavarotti, vocal coaching and prompting. Yeah, and then he came back shortly to South Africa in 1979 as artistic director of the Owen. Had beautiful recitals, and I was talking to someone just before the book launch now, and the ladies, the guy said that he attended that production at the Niku Melane, which is the Artscape today. Yeah, that was a beautiful concert. And so then he returned in the 80s back and married a woman. I say woman because later we learned that he was in fact gay. And that's of course another marginalized situation that you would want to keep secret during the time of apartheid, because it was against law. And just another battle that he has to fight, apart from being a person of color and then having specific sexual preference. But nevertheless, he married Nelly Barno and lived in New York until about 85, but it was of course for practical reasons, the green card, so that he can officially live and work in the US. And during his time in New York, he was quite prolific because he was the go-to accompanist, vocal coach. People came to his house personally and asked him to be their personal prompter, and if they wanted to do auditions in New York City, who do you go to? Gordon Jeffers. Yeah, and then again, while having these positions and contracts over seasons, he also freelanced. So then he would take a contract in San Francisco, where he vocal coached Montserrat Caballé. And also Neil Shikov, he was also a prominent American singer there. Then he returned back to South Africa for a short while to be a chorus master and repetiteur at PACT, so that is the Performance Arts Council of Transvaal, yes. Also short-lived, various issues, which we do discuss in the book, but we're doing the career and life trajectory now, but he returns then back to the US to work as a repetiteur and chorus master in Utah, in Salt Lake City, the Utah Opera Company. And then we lost touch with the letters because he didn't send a lot of letters during the period of 86 to about 90. So there's a gap, we don't really know. And I looked at newspaper reports and there were, you know, some information, but very far in between. Yes, and then 1991 came, which was when he discovered that he had HIV and AIDS. And he desperately wanted to come home, which he did, in November of 1990. And he visited his brother. And of course he was looking frail and everything. And according to both Maggie, the wife, and Jeff, people obviously saw that he's not well and kind of pushed him aside because they knew something was wrong with him. And people looked at him funny, and then eventually he told his brother that he'd rather go back to New York City where he knows that he has friends who can look after him, help him, and that he'll be able to do some work at, at wherever he is in the US. And so he returned to New York, and to his friend Laveta Johnson, who I was able to contact. She was the person who looked after him before he was hospitalized in 92 at the Goldwater Memorial Hospital. And then he passed away on the 4th of July, Independence Day in the US. And his cousin Merlin, who was actually a few months ago when we also spoke, she she told us that she was with him and she tried to connect him with his brother at home. So what she did was, there was the hospital phone that she used to call her husband in Chicago, who was on the line to South Africa, to Jeffrey, so that they could communicate with each other. And so that was the last conversation Gordon had with his brother. And just as he put the phone down, it says, he basically got convulsions, and after that, passed away. And then she left the hospital that evening to go to Loretta's house. And as she's walking across the bridge, she just, saw the beautiful fireworks. And she said it was just so beautiful where he passed away, but it was a type of celebration because he was so prolific. But I just want to read a little excerpt from the book that was on the pamphlet that his American friends wrote. And it goes as follows. Maestro Gordon Jefftas died with great fanfare on the evening of the US Independence Day, a night when the city was ablaze with fireworks and colored light, a befitting send-off for the man who had lived for the sound of music, a long way from the land of his birth.
Thank you for showing interest, actually, because I know for one, I would never have known of him or his work had it not been for you going, wait a minute, there's something here to be explored. And if there was ever a name-dropping exercise, it was in the list of names that you were just like, boop, 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 there. Hilde, what you also know is that he was a huge fan of Maria Callas. And in one of the letters, in fact in many of the letters, he often writes about the Zeffirelli production of Puccini's Tosca, in which Callas sang. Tell us more about his love for this incredible soprano.
Well, on his very first visit to Europe in 1963, end of 1963, beginning of 1964, he visits, he goes to England, and he is there for a couple of months. And he sees this production, the Zeffirelli production of Tosca with Maria Callas, and he sees her for the first time live. Now you have to remember that as a coloured person, he has never. He may have seen some productions at UCT Opera, but not really. Fiasconaro may have let him in on a live production or a Sitzprobe before the time, but the coloured people were not allowed into an auditorium. He's obviously seen some of the Eon productions, but he's not seen a good production. I'm not saying that the Eon productions were bad, but I mean, he has not seen an excellent world standard live production ever in his life. So he walks into, obviously he's in London now, he's been queuing like as they did those days, and he sees the Zeffirelli production with Maria Callas live, and it's one of the most beautiful letters to read, and he's completely blown away about the production, about her. I mean, it's one of the first letters in the book that he in detail writes to her, to May Abrahamson, reports every detail of what she does, what Callas does, and how she sounds, and how she moves, and but he's also critical of her, which is wonderful. It's just, it's not only praising her, he's just also critiquing her, which is a typical thing of the diva worshipping. Often they have this lots of praise, but also singing, talking about fat fingers and all sorts of things. About Sutherland, he often talks about Sutherland and speaking about how fat she is and how her fat fingers are. But Callas also, So, but that specific performance, and he went to see it twice, and so about every letter after that he writes to May is about some reference about Maria Callas. He always tells her to listen to Maria Callas. He often asks her to emulate her singing. I think in those days, it's probably not like that anymore today. He instructs her to emulate her voice, to sound like Callas. And I think if we don't have that many recordings of my Alron's singing, but I've listened with a colleague of mine to some of my Alron's singing, and she does sound a little bit like Callas. He sends her pictures of Maria Callas, and at the end of that specific letter, he ends with saying, "We'll make a Callas of you yet." So he was really a huge fan of Callas all the way, but also of many other sopranos. And he was a real diva worshipper, in the true sense of the word.
Well, we turn to our very own diva with the most beautiful fingers, Paulina Malefane, to sing for us from Tosca, Visi Diate. about music that just pierces the soul in the most beautiful ways. Really, really amazing. Thank you very much for that. Thank you so, so much. Before we continue with the life of Gordon, perhaps let's then reflect on what opera was like in South Africa at the time. So we go back to you, Wayne. Your book talks to the transformation in opera from the time in which Gordon tried to have a career here, but could only do it in an Aeon Group sort of context. But how did the transformation come about?
So I think when we start talking about transformation in opera specifically, we also need to remember the transformation in the country over a period of hundreds of years. And we go back to the documented history of opera. I think opera performances that we have is about, as I said earlier, the early 1800s, 1802 thereabout. And those different strands of what happened all culminates into what eventually happened. So we get to the 20th century and we have the own group there. It performs in a totally different context than what is happening in the rest of South Africa, in white South Africa, and that moves on towards 1963 when we have the provincial arts councils that was established, but also specifically for white artists to give them salaried employment. So that system, there was a system behind it that supported the artists. And we have on the other side a group that was considered amateur. So there were both these lanes of what's happening in the arts in South Africa. And obviously with Cape Verde and the provincial arts councils, it's not just about opera, it's about, so they had an orchestra, a symphony orchestra, they had an opera company with an orchestra, a separate orchestra. And then there was a theatre company and there was a ballet company. All white artists at that point. And it was nearing the end of the 70s to the 80s that the doors started opening, but also only for colored people. So it opened for specific, of all the genres, it opened for colored people, but most in opera, a lot of them came from the Young, because by then the opera activities of Young started to be less, and so they didn't have a home. And many of those singers came into Cape Verde, and that changed the face of what is happening in opera. So that was sort of the start, I think the one pivotal moment when we started seeing that there are shifts, that there's making space for, well, at that moment only for colored people in the choir also specifically. So they did not sing the big roles, they was in the choir, they were, I remembered somebody like Ronnie Tace, many people would remember, who was a member of right from the beginning, and also then eventually other singers who became part of Cape Verde. So that system started to transform in a specific way, not necessarily in the way that we eventually got to. So as the 80s went on, we get a singer like Virginia Davids and Sipho Fubesi, who were star singers and who came up in those ranks, but were also still just in the choir. And eventually in 1988, Virginia was the first person of color to sing a lead role in opera in Cape Town, in that space, in that professional space, or the space that was considered professional, but also in the white space. And this is colored woman coming about, and she's breaking down these doors that have been there over a long period for singers of color. But there was a lot of skepticism, obviously, around it, and that skepticism come out in how people write about it. So it's published, that skepticism is not only anecdotal evidence that we have published articles about how skeptical people were about Virginia as a person being able to do this role. And only then behind that lies because she is a person of color. It's not written as such, but that is what the story is. But it was a moment also, I think the next moment, after the moment of letting people into the choir, was this moment of Virginia singing. And she's not able to be here tonight, but for her to sing that role and lead role in Aida. And it's also interesting why Aida, because Aida also has a long history of blackface, and white singers used to sing the role because it is a story that's set in Africa. And they used to do white singers and blackfacing, and then here's Virginia, and she's just who she is, and she can be in that role, she can live in that role. But I also think, in a way, it was a means of making it easier for white audience to accept that somebody of color is singing a role because she is singing it because she looks like the role. And I think there's a lot of debate that we can do around that. But yes, so there's a lot of skepticism about, and I'm going to read a bit now, an actual review of the performance that says that they were skeptical, but eventually she made a huge impact, and people could see that she was actually a star singer, and eventually she reprised that role a few times, and that she was praised for that. People started looking beyond those things of being a singer of color, because also we must remember that when I read this, is also the context in which it's written, and it's written in a context where it's mostly white males that write about opera and do the judgment about what is good and what is excellent and what is not. So you have to read it within those contexts, and that's what becomes interesting in this story about the transformation of operas. Who, as the voice, will talk about what is happening in opera, and how do you look at those voices and criticize those voices and get a view of what. And it's easy to do it now because we are, almost 40 years later, and it's easy to look back at it and judge what was said. But yeah, it gives an interesting picture of how transformation in opera and the beginnings of that transformation was viewed. So yes, the choir moment and then the Virginia's performance, I think, were the initial things in the 80s that were starting points of seeing the transformation happen in opera. I just want to read this short bit. It comes from the publication of the writer. But it's referenced in the book, so you can look it up. So it goes as follows. When I sat down for this performance, it was with a degree of skepticism as to how well a local girl, launched center stage out of the chorus, was going to handle this vocally and emotionally taxing role. Well, her first appearance was promising. She moved well, established a character pretty immediately, and delivered some powerful and pleasing tones in the conversation with Amneris, as the other character, of course. But it was the concluding aria of the first scene that demonstrated the stature. The ritorno vincitor and the succeeding rizzano parola had fired drama and international security. Not just security, but a real quality and considerable power. But you see now, it was viewed as this person that should not have been able to do this. And I think it's like what Gordon's story is also this, how because of something that you didn't have a choice, that you are judged as to how you can relate to Western classical music. And I think if you read it today, a phrase like a local girl, it would be highly offensive. I mean, it was published in the newspaper. So it's a document of our time also, and how it was seen at that moment.
Sure. I suppose in 2024 and yes, 88, it was a different context altogether. Because that will live in prosperity. You know, the person who wrote that can't go back and erase it and say, actually, no, on reflection, this is actually what I meant. When I joined Captain Opera to serve on its board, Professor Virginia Davids was still an active member of the board, and one of the stories she would share, almost anecdotally, is how, and it was around that time, she would be on stage at the Nico, singing her heart out with her co-stars, and in the minute the curtain went down, they would not speak to her. They would hardly even acknowledge her, and yet these people have had this special experience on stage, which is heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah, but coming back to the documentation of it, it's also good that we have this document all the time to remind us of how this transformation came about, what people were feeling. And I mean, Virginia told the story in lots of articles and lots of interviews, and it's a good thing for people to hear today and understand that context where that comes, and also understand why opera looks like it is today and why we needed to do that.
In fact, in another interview, she references how she was told why do you want to come and study at this particular institution when the University of the Western Cape was created for people like you, essentially, which is Nelson Mandela on the 10th of May 1994 wished that the sun will not set on such a wonderful human achievement as the constitutional democracy. And I've been returning to that line every single day in the build-up to the elections next year. Because I think we forget. We forget, sorry, 29th of May, next Wednesday. Did I say next year? It feels like the elections come already. But we forget what a marvelous human achievement this country is. And I think hearing stories like this reminds us of that. Let's listen to more music. Aida is the opera we referenced, so we're going to invite back Paulina and Violina to sing for us from Aida, Fula Sote. Oh my word. Thank you, thank you. Heavens, if someone was shouting at me like that every day, I would take it every day. I would literally take it every day. What wonderful voices, my word, absolutely. Well, Wayne, that was the 80s. Let's fast forward now to the 90s. 1994 is beckoning. There's a new hope in South Africa. What changes are we starting to see in opera?
So I have to take it a bit before 1994. So by the 90s, we started seeing that the debates coming up, and we see this in the newspaper reportage, that things are starting to change. We need to make space. We don't have this especially in the arts, white and Western European centered arts organizations. So in opera, along with the political changes in the country, there's a lot of talk and leading up to 94 about, is opera relevant in South Africa? When we are in a country that with different priorities, socioeconomic priorities that we need to fund, is opera an art form that is actually relevant to this country? It is a foreign art form, it comes from, it's always a European art form, and there's a long history there. But what does it mean for us? Is it relevant to us? So we see a lot of articles about, yes, it is relevant because it does certain things, it shows the cultural maturity of the country. We see also others that say no, but it has no reference to it. As we have other music, indigenous music and musical styles that we need to develop, and we can't just focus on opera as a genre, and obviously the other art forms such as ballet and also. So there was a lot of debate, and it went over, up to from 1990 to 94 and beyond that, about how do we make space in our political and cultural context for all the art forms, not just, because previously it was only the Western European art that had a place and had structures that supported that and funding that supported it. How do we make space for other forms of art? So, but I think in terms of opera, there was specific, the other art forms maybe also, but opera had specific, I think, a champion that worked towards ensuring that it remains part of this cultural context, and that it has a place somewhere in the broader spectrum, because we need to make space for other art forms. We can't just focus on these. And I think that person was Angelo Gubato, who was at the Opera School here and also at Cape Town Opera at that time. And he got into his minibus or the Cape Town Opera logo, and then he went into townships and went to audition singers, because also to remember is that there is a long history of choir singing in townships, and the choral competitions that a lot of singers come from, and there was also the choral competitions that she was part of. So there's a long tradition of that, and he knew about this tradition and knew that we should get the people from there and here in the city centre, where we sort of ignore what's happening in the rest of the city, to get people to come together and getting their sounds, and soon to discover lots of talented singers, and that eventually led to the production. There was first production in 1995 of In the Prophet of God, which is an opera by Prof, a local composer, and that sort of showcased some of the singers that came up through the choral training program that we started in 1993. So there was a few singers that came out of that. But eventually it was Paulie and Bess in 1996 that was this pivotal production that sort of changed the face of opera quite literally, because it is a work that was composed by the Gershon brothers, and it tells the story of the American South, and it's about the black community. And it also, his narrative says that it should be an opera sung by black singers and not any other singers. It should be black singers because it relates to that context. Although we now know that context there's a racial undertone to that context, because he portrays black people as being drug addicts and violent people. So then there's that context. But in 1996, it became a vehicle for Cape Town Opera to showcase the transformation of opera happening there, and getting black singers on stage, and it was a whole cast of black singers. But there was also a lot of debate if you read the media, there's a lot of debate about this new opera that it's a black opera, it's called. That's what it was called, the Black Ribbons. And there's a quote that says the first in which black singers from Africa would sing in these roles. And it's true, it was the first time that an opera company in Africa did organ and bass with African singers. So I think that was also one of the pivotal moments. Organ and bass was a production that really showed us that there's a change that's happening. And opera is no longer this Western European elitist art form. It's an art form that the whole of the country wants to participate in and needs to be made space for. So I just want to read the three, I think, quotes from Podium about Podium Bass. And the first is, with this performance of Podium Bass, important aspects of intercultural ties in the world of the arts come under scrutiny. Perhaps it is precisely for this reason that there is so much international interest in what is currently happening at the Milane Theatre, which is now Artscape. George Gershwin had been accused of racism several times because of his masterpiece, and this debate gets an integrated ironic dimension with the Cape Town performance. And in another article, so because of the unique occasion of a first performance in Africa, the continent of the original heritage of those subversive characters in Gershwin's classic opera, the cross-pollination of cultures attains a new rich nature. Can there be better proof of our cultural maturity in South Africa than this Cape Town production? And then the last quote, which says a lot about how people in the audience engaged with us. Before one attends this performance, it would be wise to get your head politically oriented on a few points, because political correctness does not bring you any closer to appreciation. Gershwin has been politically correct, in parentheses, enough with his work. It is only the black characters who sing, the real people. And so it's an interesting debate around Podium Bass, and suddenly there's the real people singing, and it becomes an interesting take on how opera has changed and starting to change. And it went, Angela Bartos also quoted this, it went from 98% white to 98% black. And it was this transformation of opera that happened, and engagement with opera, and these long traditions that all come together into this production.
Well, it is to Sandile Zitha we turn now for a wonderful, wonderful aria from Podium Bass, I Got Plenty on Nothing.
I got no business.
that. Cape Town City Ballet, by the way, is celebrating their 90th season, or at least 90 years of existence. They started off with celebrating the music of Gershwin in iPod Rhythm. I think there are about 4 more performances left, 5 perhaps, at 5 at the Artscape. If you've got some time, please buy some tickets, go and enjoy. There's some dancing, obviously, that happens, as well as some music. But Sandile, thank you very much. Another round of applause for you. Let's go back to the letters. Hilde, how do you go about the process of deciding which letters to include in the book and which ones to leave out?
I can just give you a quick overview of the process. It's quite a lengthy process, and I got the process of the letters from the family in 2013. We published really last year, so it's a 10-year process. Doesn't have to take that long, but this process took long because we had to wait for opportunities and all sorts of things. But in the end, because it was so many letters over such a long period of time, I transcribed everything. And realized it was really a lifetime of communication and a long story, really somebody's life. But then, when you get to the point of having to make a decision about a book, and another issue we had to deal with is because we have only his letters to her and not hers back. So you have to create a book about it. So there's a lot of, we did cut some entire letters, but we had to eventually cut sections from letters, because you would, for example, go off on a tangent about something. It was, for example, one thing that I found very interesting, which my co-editors didn't find all that interesting. He would, for example, describe attending a practice session with a very interesting director. Somewhere, it was in the late 60s, it was a black and white production by a very off traviata in London. And I know for sure, for example, that nobody in South Africa would have seen that production, and my Abrahamse would not have had access to any of that. And I found that, for example, fascinating. But, I have a really lively imagination. Well, several of my colleagues said to me, that's very boring. So we cut that. But then, some letters, you eventually have to make a story out of it. Because that was one thing that I actually also wanted to mention. We had some feedback from people who said, oh, but it's not a storybook. So it's indeed, the letters aren't really, if you read the letters from beginning to end, it's not a storybook about Gordon. It's his letters. It's really an academic book. And there's some biographical information, but it's not a tell-all book about his life or about his comments about Eon Group or something, but it's an academic book of his life and of his views and of his experiences. But it's really a book for research. So we made our decisions really on what is interesting for a researcher. And maybe you found the name dropping, maybe some people would find the name dropping slightly annoying, but for a researcher, but for a researcher those are the fascinating bits. But he would sometimes write about how he would have a whole piece about how driving around London and telling around London that it looked like, and we would cut those kind of pieces, because we had 130,000 words. We had to cut that down to 80,000 words. So we had to cut quite a lot of material, and they added about 10,000 words on contextual information of his life and those kind of things. So we had cut quite a lot of material, but it's not, and there were also quite a lot of postcards and so on, which we couldn't include into the book as such. But it doesn't read like a story, like a biography from beginning to end. In that kind of way. It's really an academic book.
Well, so let's find out then what made the cut. Well, what's in the content of the letters?
Yes. So, I mean, Gordon's letters over his lifespan had quite a repertoire, so to speak, because as he developed as a professional and as a human being, so also the things he said changed with him. For example, his early letters, like Gordon said now, he wrote quite enthusiastically about his first encounters, traveling, going abroad, seeing opera productions, and we heard about the colours, things that he also saw. And he also talked to May about his failures and successes in there. But two things throughout the entire 28-year correspondence was, of course, the coachings and the vocal lessons that he gave May via the lessons. So she would send a tape or something, and then he would write feedback to her saying, oh, remember the diction there, the pronunciation there, the E, the R, the U, and those type of specifics. And of course the other topic that they discussed at length over the 28-year correspondence was EO group topics, politics and changes, and what are they doing, is she part of this production and so on. And then of course behind the scenes gossip of the productions he's working on that side of the world, where, I mean, there was this one, and it's in here, where he was one of the famous singers, like I think it was the Kosoto lady, sorry I can't remember her first name, but she was panicking behind stage and had a meltdown and said even to him that, Maestro, I'm on my periods, I can't do this. And then he had to now talk her down, and you can do it, it's okay, and and then she went to go sing and did a great job and so on. But his writing style is quite eloquent and picturesque descriptions. It's so vivid, you immediately see the scene playing in front of you as you read it. And I'm going to read it later now. But by the time we got to the 80s, when I said it was kind of tumultuous for him because there was financial strain, it was a rough time, he got sick, ill, his letters also changed. Because the first half, about the 60s till about just before 80s, the letters were very long descriptions, very detailed, and you'll hear now. And then when the 80s came, it was quite short, to the point, a little bit stark. Even the tone was totally different to how he had previously written. But I mean, this reveals to us kind of the nature of just being human, like impermanence, where things change, and you change as an individual. So how you are at 40 is not how you were at 20, for example, and your experiences. And I mean, of course, Gordon's story in itself is a liberation narrative, where he rose above the circumstances that he was in, and it wasn't easy. There were times where he, wanted to give up, but the thing that kept him going was his deep love for opera, and was quite passionate about that too. So, Africa, I would like to read a little bit of Gordon to you. Okay. So here we are, 14 September 1973, and he sent this letter from Zurich because he was working there during that time, and it goes as follows. My dear May, how are things with you? Thanks for your letter, which might get answered further on. Why? Because I'm waiting for the train back to Zurich. I have at 9 rehearsal tomorrow at 10 a.m, and so I'm taking the sleeping train. Today, I was hastily called to Milano by the Italian agent to meet Renata Tabaldi and to talk about a concert she and Franco Corelli are to have in London, October 9th. Seems like a follow-up to the Maria Callas and Giuseppe Stefano concert, which happened Saturday next. I was too embarrassed to ask. Anyway, I had an appointment with the greatest voice in the world this afternoon. Arrived at her Milan apartment 5 minutes early, showed in by the maid Tina, and Madame Tabaldi appeared not a minute earlier than 5:30, the appointed time. She called me Maestro, so I said for Signora. Well-groomed, reddish-brown hair, groomed just like the latest record covers, black pants and multicolored and probably very expensive top. She didn't strike me as excessively tall, as we've seen in pictures, and she kind of hobbles for a walk. The reason I was there was because I had been suggested, but she said, "Who's he? Who has he played for in concert?" And out came the 3 or 4 names, little famous I have on my list. May Abramser in South Africa, etc. Anyway, she went out and came back with an armful of disarrayed music, while I played with a poodle who seemed extremely friendly, as opposed to its owner, who was very cool, in absolute self-control, and gave only what seemed to me calculating smiles when not talking. She didn't know exactly what she would sing, for sure Bohème and Tosca duets. About Corelli's repertoire she didn't know. And in the end she decided to stick closer to a program they have already done in the States, Setu Mami, etc. And talked about key and tonality. Then she couldn't find one piece amongst the massive music. So the maid was hailed, and she had to go through all the suitcases. No, it wasn't there. It was left behind in New York, Tabaldi. Oh, Dio, what am I going to do? The maid suggested another piece. No, came the answer. I can't sing that in London. Then bring me the tape recorder so we can find out what key Setu Mami was in last time. And so we spent half an hour hearing the beginnings of several pieces to check the keys. That over, very demurely she asks, "Can I hear something?" Well, with nothing in the written keys, I was lucky to make a pick and choose one that wasn't a tone up or down, and asked, "Will you sing?" "No," is the answer. "Shall I sing?" "Yes," she smiles. So I start, papa for 2 bars, and I thought, I can't let this woman listen to my out-of-tune voice, so I popped out, and continued with my papas. After 10 bars, she started to sing about 3 octaves lower, in a voice that any person might have, then got lost. So back to the beginning. But then we got to enjoy ourselves. I forgot to tell you, all this time I'm shitting with nerves, plus the gusset of my pants tore in the taxi. Fortunately, I was wearing underwear. So including having to concentrate, I had to think about keeping my legs as closed as much as possible. Well, we did this and that, and I figured she was checking me out. With that over, but still not a word of, "Will you play for us?" "No, I don't think you do." She offered a drink. I chose Coke. She nothing, because as she told me, if I drink, I get more thirsty. So I do without. She gave me her music and also a folder. A last word that I'll hear from her through the agent, as to rehearsals and when Corelli will be in town. Goodbye, keep well. I left somewhat perplexed, not knowing whether she wanted me or not. Anyway, I had her music under my arm, and I figured if I don't play the concerts, I did have the chance to talk with a famous soprano, and did play for her, even if she sang down below the stage, in a voice that was the least akin to the voice we know. I talked with the agent after, and he figured if I had the music, that was it. But he would hear from Tabaldi and will let me know for sure. Meanwhile, go away and practice. Now, I really wanted to answer your letter, but first I wanted to share my afternoon's experience with you. I hope you don't find it egoistic. I've been waiting every day for your concert. Listen, I'm tired of writing, and I better not lose the goddamn train to Zurich. Write me all love, Gordon.
I think should you decide to do an audiobook version of this book, you found your recording artist. Well, Hilde, we made reference to the tapes.
Yes. yes. Let me just quickly check my notes. Yeah, well, what they did is really, he coached her. She actually had very little training in South Africa. Just in her early years, she had some training, and then she had some training with Olga Manyoni, which I think she was also here at the school, at the opera school, at some stage. But throughout those years, and much of it we also had to cut out of the letters because it was just too much. She would send him a tape with her singing, or she would send him a tape of the groups practicing, and then he would comment on that in the letter. So we would discuss her singing, and he would sometimes also send her a tape. So it was either with letters or with tape. So that's the way the training went. Not too many of the tapes survived because they would tape and they tape over the one, over the others. But we have some of them that did survive, and we actually want to play you some of the tapes so we can hear him speaking, coaching her, and Féroll-Jon will contextualize a bit.
So what I did, the tapes that we did have, of course I listened to them, I transcribed them and so on. But today I compiled a little sound clip with various aspects of what he had sent to May and what she sent back and so on. And so the compilation it's going to open and you're going to hear singing, and that will be May singing and him accompanying her. He was in South Africa and she recorded that particular lesson rehearsal with her. And then of course, ultimately, like Hilde said, they would send voice notes, very old-fashioned voice notes. So she would send a tape, he would comment back on it, and of course make notes and refer to the tape that she had sent. So you also hear some of that. And then he sent a tape where he was prompting a rehearsal or performance where Pavarotti was actually singing. So you'll hear he's saying the words ahead, and then he sings, and so on. And then, of course, we have some footage of the legendary Royal Albert Hall concert with Renata Tebaldi. That's also going to come through, where you're going to hear him playing the piano and Tebaldi singing. And I'm signed down to play for us.
Thank you.
Yes.
Today is September 12th, 1983, New York City. And I'm going to start out replying to your beautiful tape. It was excellent. I had great fun. I like your tape recording very much. In fact, I prefer it to your letters. It's more live, more personal, I find. Now, what is important to the person that listens to you sing is he doesn't know the notes the composer wrote, right? Verdi wrote. So he's not concerned with that. You and I are very concerned with that, but the man who listens is not. But what the man can feel is the beat. And if you don't feel the beat inside of you, the man who's listening to you will be confused by music. The most important thing in the music, in this music, is the rhythm and the expression, and then keep the high notes for a long time.
Non può, nessuno, tu va, appreso, era.
Remember, E, more of the notes. Just one more. Mori. 3-4 times a week for a couple of hours, go and accompany Lorenzo Corelli, the wife of Franco Corelli. Franco Corelli, the famous Italian tenor that I played concerts with Tebaldi in London and Vienna. Aiming object and aiming my life that I really need to withhold. I'm just sorry that I cannot do it right now. Anyway, all the best and thank you very much for writing. And until another time, okay? And keep well, take care of your family, and study the albums that you have, okay? Ciao, and thank you.
Contextualizing that, and most importantly, bringing us him. To have him in the room was actually quite special. Thank you very much for that. We know we're going on 2 hours, and I promise you only a few more treats, and then we're going to release you to your Tuesday. So Jeremy, quite a slight change. We're going to talk about the transformation in opera and the Africanization of opera, and then we're going to have both the Fidelio as well as the Princess Maboko going back to back. So you'll stay on stage and I'll intro the next one, just so that you know that we're going off script basically, as it is. But the concept of the Africanization of opera is quite a significant part of the story of opera in Cape Town and South Africa, isn't it?
Yes, so most of what is written in this book is about that. The term Africanization has come into play a lot, but when you think of the rest of the continent, we should talk about the South Africanization of opera, because what we did with opera was to South Africanize it and to indigenize it, and the research that Hilde has also done. So we've done a lot of localized settings, and we've done translations of opera. So we've taken the Western European repertoire and we've made it our own through a range of processes and over years. So there's localized settings and translation. We've incorporated indigenous musical styles into opera. So we have a production of the Dona Years by Purcell, that is Purcell's music, but also indigenous music interweaved and instruments, all of that. We also have socio-political and cultural references. So there's a lot of productions that were done over the past 30 years that has been South Africanized. So we have Laboran in 1997, and that was changed to Laboran when we transported it from Paris to Soweto, and it had the cultural reference of 16 June 1976. So those are the sort of cultural things that we did to opera. There's also musically is a production of the Magic Flute in Pepe Yomlingo, which Paulina sang in the Queen of the Night, and that was done with marimbas and glass bottles and drums. So totally different to the usual orchestra that we have. And also then productions with political references, and Fidelio especially is one that was used over the years in the liberation struggle as something that commented on that. And Fidelio is about a man who was wrongly imprisoned, and his wife is trying to get him out of prison, and it obviously resonates with Nelson Mandela's story. So we've got that in 1990, when Mandela was released. There was a production of Fidelio. In 1994, when we had our first election, there's a production of Fidelio. 2004, there was a wonderful production on Robben Island, which obviously relates to that story of our country. And then 2012, Christine Krause did a production in the castle, which related to our history, our colonial history of slavery and all that references that we had there. So that was, I'm mentioning a few examples, but there's a lot of things that we've transformed opera from what it was written 200 or 300 years ago into a South African version of it. And then of course we have South African opera. So since from the 90s up till now, we've had about over 20 South African operas written and performed. I think the performance part is important because we have a lot of operas that are written and never get to the stage, but it's quite a lot. It's a lot of productions, or South African productions. And in those operas, we've talked about our stories. So we use it as a means of restitution, of bringing the unacknowledged histories to the fore. So we've had stories about icons such as Chris Arnie, liberation struggles, Brighton Bach. We've had lots of stories about, and then obviously an important one also, Prentice Magogo was an opera by Mzilikazi Kumalo. So there's been a lot of operas that's South African and bringing the stories of that were unacknowledged and the people that we did not recognize in the liberation struggle, that brought that to the opera stage, using opera as a means of restitution and telling the South African story. So, yeah.
And in a few minutes, we'll hear the beautiful Iyabula Lengane from Princess Makoko. It will be sung by Linda Mbozi, Tembeleke Sokama, and Ntombi Nkosi. But before that, Fidelio, as Wayne indicated, is a very important part of our story of opera in Cape Town in South Africa. Karabo, how do I pronounce your name? Rabaloi, Luvo Maranti, and Sandile Zitha are going to go on stage to give us a wonderful, wonderful aria from Fidelio, which is in a language I can't speak.
Oh,
Applause, please, for Karabo, Luvo, and Sandile. And now to celebrate some local opera from Princess Makoko, Iyagula Lengane. Please welcome Linda, Ntombi and Ntombi. Really, really is amazing. Another round of applause, please. I think it would be wrong of us, after spending the last 2 hours reflecting on the past of opera, not for us to look at the future of opera, which is why Jeremy is joining us on stage now. But Jeremy, before we talk about the trends on stage, perhaps both to you, Hilde and Wayne, let's look around the scholarship of South African opera.
Yeah, I can just say quickly, I've spoken too much already tonight. Opera scholarship in the past 20 years has really exploded. We have documented the history of the way that opera has found a foothold in the country since since the first production in 1802. So that's been have been written, but there's quite a lot of work that has to be done still on biographies. I mean, last week I had the launch of Mkhanyiseli's book, but those are short inserts, and many of those lives really deserve to have in-depth studies on larger studies on those singers. New compositions have been investigated. We have explored reimaginations of European repertoires, as Wayne's book has done, but quite a lot of that can still be done. We've looked into local opera productions, indebtedness to Africa. We've even started looking at opera as a decolonial project, looking further into, also looking into how opera has settled in other parts of Africa. That is also the way that the research is looking at things. Also, scholarship also looks today at how opera not necessarily sits in the opera house, but outside of the opera house, in the choral tradition, but also in other settings, in other countries where the word opera means other things and can sort of feed back into opera production. So that it's really a huge field. There's so much to do. So I would like to actually really tell people, people who are singing and people who are interested in opera, that scholarship is actually a very interesting field.
I think just to add to that, also archiving, because we don't have a lot of archives of performance in South Africa, and I think that was my struggle, as I said right at the beginning. Starting doing the scholarship, doing the research, you need references like that. And then in South Africa, unfortunately, our archiving and our documenting of performances is not good. So we need to research. So one of our colleagues is actually busy with the mapping of opera activities across the country, because there's no real source for that to get information on what was performed, when was it performed, what were the dates, where was it performed. So, and which is basic information that we need to do with other research on top of that.
That's very promising. Joby, what trends are we seeing on stage?
I think, going back a little bit to that idea that was prevalent at one stage, that somehow opera was not for here and that it was a European thing. When, roughly the time I conducted this Princess Magogo, I remember the arts minister at the time saying, "Why are we teaching Africans to sing like Italians?" And my reaction at the time was, opera is sung all around the world, performed and loved all around the world, and by definition, all but one of those countries are not Italian. I don't think, the point is, this is an art form which somehow touches people, which is, not only is it the power of the human voice to absolutely touch people and inspire people deeply, but it is a way to present stories which are not only deeply human and universal, but which are quite often social, political, and otherwise, and are adaptable to the circumstances in which they are performed. And this is done everywhere in the world. I don't think, opera in Russia is not, performed with reference to the local community any more than it is in Argentina or in Korea. So what we're doing by pursuing productions which are slightly more locally founded is really what is happening with opera all around the world, and I think that is what we have to carry on doing. The fact is that at the moment, I don't know whether this will be forever or whether this is just a moment in time, the greatest and most interesting voices of the world are coming from this country. And the theatres of the world are looking towards us for singers. So I don't think we should be embarrassed about it. I don't think it should be some sort of curiosity. I don't think we should be changing it necessarily, route. Obviously a production is always a reinterpretation, but the pieces themselves stand. I'm not against the odd experiment with fusing opera, as one does in cuisine, and one does all sorts of other things. That's fine, but I don't feel that opera in its pure form is not relevant to him. And of course, the other thing to say is that opera is being written all around the world, and here is no exception. We've just heard some of the Princess Magogo that was really from the very beginning of the century. We did even, just a couple of years ago, an opera on the life of Sarah Barton by a South African composer, by Hendrik Hofmeyr, a piece which stood up, as far as I was concerned, in its rigour and in the quality of its writing with any piece written in the world today, which included elements of African-inspired music when appropriate to the story, included rather gaudy 18th century British music when necessary, and included rather rigorous serialism, quite academic music, when talking about the French pseudo-racial scientist. So I mean, it was a piece where the musical language could absolutely respond to the situation. We've done others which have been far more African-based. We did in collaboration with Cape Town Opera, Amagocha, Heroines, about really just looking at the issue of gender-based violence in this country, looking at the story of Kwesi, who had taken a former president to court of rape allegations, and our very sad story of the UCT student Uyinene, who had been killed in an incident that one would very much consider to be a gender-based violence situation. I think pieces can absolutely respond to, and of course, and most recently at Cape Town Opera, the media sensationalism of the Pistorius trial. I mean, all opera has always been like this. Verdi was writing political operas in his day. Mozart was writing political operas in his day. Had it not been for Beaumarchais and Mozart writing The Marriage of Figaro, well, maybe the French Revolution would have been a year or two later. I don't know. I think it's important. So I think it's healthy here. I think we're doing a lot. I think we have to spread the word a little wider. I think there is a perception among certain people that this is somehow elitist, expensive, not understandable, all these things, and I think we're all working, all of us who are practitioners here, on spreading a message, which is to say that everybody who comes gets immediately captivated by this. It speaks directly to the heart and the intellect, and I mean, I've certainly never met anybody who was not keen to come a second time when they come for the first.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to note that we can reinterpret some of the standards, I mean, the thousands of operas that have been written and performed. But beyond the incredible talent of these wonderful voices we're training, one of our greatest exports is going to be our stories, and we're better to write our stories than ourselves, which is why I'm thrilled at the rate and amount of new work that we showcasing and experimenting with, which is incredible. And of course, you and your institution are doing a wonderful thing in leading that. We will be hearing from Sarah Bachman, Broken String. Do you want to give us a context a little bit to this aria, for those people perhaps who missed the opera?
Yes, for certain. So, I mean, this was an opera that had originated just with a scene back in 2009, and that scene was really the death scene of Sarah Bachman, Sarki as she was known at the time, in Paris. Before she was in Paris, she had been taken to London as what one can always only describe as a sort of circus act, as people had never seen South Africans and people of her racial description, and there were curiosities. It was the most horrible sort of period in British history, I think. But this aria is something that the character sings as a sort of opening gambit on stage in London, as a sort of, one might say, introduction to African music. It's very African in its inspiration, but it also speaks to to a real homesickness for her. It's a very sad piece, despite the fact it's a performance piece. It has that wonderful dual nature.
And for our final performance this evening, please welcome on stage Dzangare to sing Broken String. Firstly, thank you very much to Opera UCT for hosting this program. finally, Jeremy, who not only plays a fantastic piano, but he leads this incredible organization. Thank you to Christine for your incredible work and for helping direct all of this today. Thank you to Fiona, as well as the wonderful singers of Opera ECT. Oh, and their teachers. My word, wasn't that magic? The two books, Opera in Cape Town, The Critic's Voice by Dr. Wayne Muller, and Sorry I Am What I Am, The Life and Letters of the South African pianist and opera coach Gordon Jeffers, 1943 to 1992, are both available for sale in the foyer outside. The authors and the editors are going to be outside to obviously talk to any of the questions you might have. We have to say, you also want to grab a glass of wine while you're discussing the books and much of what has been reflected here on stage. A round of applause, please, for our panel. If I may, so that you all can come and get your final applause, if the singers would come up on stage, please. Nontobeko Bhengu, Mkhanyiseli Dyantyi, Sandile Zitha, Karabo Rabaloi, Luvo Maranti, Mbozi, Ntombi Nkosi, Dzangare, Paulina Malefane, Violina Anguelov-Hobbs, Sipho Fubesi, and I know that Professor Tikolo is in the room. Big round of applause for all of our actors today. And Jeremy, if you can join on the stage, please. Jeremy Silva, our maestro. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy your evening. Buy the books, get them signed, speak to the authors, and see you at the opera!